Welcome to the weekly global briefing: markets, tech, climate, conflict, and insights. The world economy is on track for its slowest growth year since the pandemic, with output expected to expand only about 2.9% in 2025, which is down from 3.3% in 2024. A major factor here is the new trade tensions. Higher U.S. tariffs have created a structural shock, crimping global demand and dragging down growth in many countries. This trade war environment means that even if tariffs were removed now, it wouldn't immediately restore growth, and honestly, any escalation could risk a global recession. Inflation is easing in many regions, thanks to weaker demand and lower energy prices, and most central banks are considering rate cuts. Notably though, the US is an outlier. US tariffs are pushing prices slightly upward, with inflation there expected to peak around 3 to 3.5% in the third quarter of 2025 as companies pass on higher import costs. The Federal Reserve is therefore holding interest rates high longer than others, likely steady into early 2026, just to make sure inflation is contained. In contrast, Europe's inflation should fall below the ECB's 2% target during 2025, allowing the ECB to continue easing rates with a forecast down to about 1.5% by the end of 2025. With growth slowing, governments are loosening the purse strings. High deficit spending is expected as policymakers try to stimulate their economies. For example, Germany's budget deficit may hit its highest level since reunification due to big investments in infrastructure and defense. In the US, interest costs on debt are climbing, adding to a growing deficit as well. While this spending may cushion the slowdown, it definitely raises long-term debt sustainability concerns. Slower growth and high rates are definitely being felt on Main Street. Many households are facing persistent cost of living strains. Even though overall inflation is moderating, essentials like food and housing are still pretty pricey. With central banks keeping borrowing costs elevated, loans and mortgages remain expensive, which really squeezes those with debt. The upside here is that price pressures are lower than in the past 2 years. For example, US inflation has dipped to about 2.3 to 2.4%, the lowest since 2021. But honestly, any relief at the checkout counter is pretty gradual. Policymakers are working to balance controlling inflation with avoiding a hard landing for jobs and incomes. The slowdown is, well, widespread, but definitely uneven. US growth is projected to decelerate to roughly 1.5% in 2025 as higher tariffs and labor constraints start to bite. Europe is hovering around 1% growth with weak exports, though easing policy helps a bit. China is facing headwinds from US trade barriers and a housing downturn. Growth of about 4.5% is expected along with some risks of deflation. In brighter spots, India is set to lead major economies with nearly 6% growth in 2025 driven by strong domestic demand. These contrasts mean investors are watching closely to see which regions might navigate 2025 best. Overall, markets remain kind of choppy. The outlook is cautious but not outright recessionary, barring a major trade escalation. Artificial intelligence is, really dominating the tech landscape in 2025, moving from hype to actual real-world implementation. Businesses are now deploying AI agents to automate routine tasks, not just experiment. In fact, about 1 in 4 companies using AI are expected to have AI agents working autonomously by year-end, handling duties like customer service, drafting content or code, and so on, and this share could reach 1 in 2 by 2027. Workflows in many industries are fundamentally changing, with AI taking over repetitive chores under human supervision, so employees can focus more on creative and strategic work. Ubiquitous AI in devices AI is steadily being woven into everyday devices. By the end of 2025, roughly 30% of all new devices, from smartphones to appliances, are predicted to have generative AI capabilities built in. For laptops, about half of new models may be AI-enhanced with onboard intelligence. This means personal gadgets will increasingly handle complex tasks locally, like, say, voice assistants that truly understand context, or phones that can run advanced AI apps without needing cloud access. Tech firms are racing to optimize small AI models that can run on device. Microsoft, for example, is touting new mini models like 5.4 that excel at specialized reasoning. So, expect our gadgets to feel a lot smarter and honestly more personalized. Rise of specialized AI. After the boom in large general AI like ChatGPT, 2025 is seeing a shift toward narrow, industry-specific AI solutions. Sectors such as law, medicine, finance, and manufacturing are adopting AI tailored to their needs. Experts note it's feasible to train smaller models for niche domains, which require less data and compute, making AI way more accessible to all kinds of businesses. For example, in healthcare, AI is moving beyond just transcribing notes to actually assisting in drug development and medical image analysis. This trend means AI's impact is spreading out of big tech and into the broader economy, often in less flashy but highly impactful ways. Multimodal AI and new capabilities. Another breakthrough is the emergence of multimodal AI systems. That is AI that can process and generate text, images, audio, and video all together. This year, models are getting much better at handling mixed media. For instance, Google's Gemini 2.0, which launched recently, can take in text and images or video and produce a combined analysis. Multimodal AI could, for example, watch a market news video and gauge the speaker's tone and facial cues to give a nuanced read on investor sentiment. These systems open the door to AI performing complex tasks, like interpreting surveillance footage or even designing graphics from a voice prompt. However, there's a growing east-west divide in AI. Some advanced models from Western companies are not being released in certain regions due to regulatory concerns. Notably, Meta has held back its newest AI in Europe over what they call regulatory unpredictability. This really highlights how AI progress is rapid, but, navigating laws and ethics is still an evolving challenge. Regulation and ethics. So, as AI becomes more powerful and pervasive, regulators are, scrambling to catch up. The European Union's AI Act and other proposals worldwide aim to set guardrails on AI deployment, from transparency requirements to limits on high-risk uses. Tech companies are honestly operating in a fog of uncertainty in some markets. The balance between innovation and oversight is a hot debate. Too much restriction could slow competitiveness, but too little could allow misuse or bias. Meanwhile, there's growing public discourse on AI ethics. Concerns about deepfakes, job displacement, and AI decision transparency are front and center. In short, 2025 is a year where AI's transformative potential is clearer than ever, but so is the need to ensure this tech is used responsibly. Record heat and climate milestones. The planet continues to send alarming signals in 2025. Global temperatures in the first quarter of the year were the second warmest ever recorded, extending an extraordinary heating trend that began in mid-2023. Climate scientists warn that while 2025 might not quite top the hottest year on record, it is very likely to rank in the top 3. In fact, the World Meteorological Organization projects an 80% chance that one of the next 5 years will break the all-time heat record, and a 70% likelihood that the 5-year average from 2025 to 2029 will exceed the critical plus 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold above pre-industrial levels. Every fraction of a degree of warming amplifies risks. We're already seeing more extreme heat waves, wildfires, floods, and storm intensity as a result. Extreme heat waves. This summer has really underscored how climate change is not a distant threat, but a current reality. An unusually early and intense heat wave struck the United States in June, with parts of the Midwest and East smashing records. Nearly 174 million Americans, or about half the country, faced extreme heat conditions in that event. Climate scientists attributed this heat wave directly to global warming. Analysis shows human-caused climate change made such extreme heat at least 3 times more likely, and in some areas, 5 times more likely. Cities from Chicago to New York sweltered with heat indices well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, or plus 38 degrees Celsius, and even nighttime temperatures stayed at record-high lows, warm nights that failed to cool below 80 degrees Fahrenheit. These conditions are dangerous, exacerbating health risks and straining power grids, and they foreshadow the new normal summers if emissions aren't curbed. The extreme patterns we're seeing aren't just confined to one region. Around the world, 2025 has brought some truly extraordinary climate anomalies. The Arctic sea ice actually hit a record low extent for winter, from January through March, And Antarctic sea ice also shrank to its second lowest on record. These are really disturbing signs for long-term sea level and ecosystems. Many areas are facing back-to-back disasters. We're talking historic floods in one place, then severe droughts in another. Scientists keep emphasizing that as we get closer to about 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, these once rare extremes like massive wildfires and monsoon disruptions are becoming both more frequent and more severe. For instance, South Asia is continuing a trend of heavier than normal monsoon rains in recent years, which is contributing to floods, while parts of Africa and Latin America are battling persistent drought. The big takeaway here is that climate change is already here, and every increment of warming just intensifies the disruptions to daily life, agriculture, and infrastructure. In the face of all these events, governments are really under pressure to respond. There's some movement on a few fronts. More cities are developing heat action plans and early warning systems for extreme weather, which is encouraging. Internationally, discussions are ongoing about financing climate adaptation and even potential geoengineering research, though that's still pretty controversial. Yet carbon emissions remain high. The anticipated strong El Niño that's underway could push temperatures in 2024 or 2025 even higher, which will really test global commitments under the Paris Agreement. The latest science makes it clear that without aggressive emissions cuts, we risk surpassing 1.5 degrees Celsius regularly, not just in single years. The world's eyes will be on the upcoming climate summits and whether major emitters actually ramp up their targets. Meanwhile, the harsh climate impacts of 2025 are a vivid reminder of what's at stake, and why timely updates on these environmental shifts are just so crucial for everyone. Europe's largest conflict since the Second World War is still grinding on in Ukraine, with no definitive end in sight just yet. On the battlefield, fighting remains intense along multiple fronts, but major territorial changes are coming pretty slowly. Russia has pressed offensives in the east and south. In June alone, Russian forces seized about 550 square kilometers of territory, which is roughly the size of a large city. However, they've struggled to capture any major cities, often getting stalled at fortified Ukrainian positions. Some towns have actually held out against assaults for a year. The human cost is staggering. Total Russian casualties, whether killed or wounded, have now exceeded 1 million since the full-scale invasion began, with 240,000 of those just in the first half of this year. Ukrainian losses are also very high, though the precise figures are closely guarded. Each minor advance is coming at great expense, and that's raising tough questions about how long these offensive operations can really be sustained. So, a defining feature of the war in 2025 is the explosion of drone warfare. Russia, in particular, has dramatically ramped up its use of one-way attack drones against Ukrainian cities and infrastructure. The Russian military launched around 1,900 drones in April, 4,000 in May, and 5,000 in June, a massive increase month over month. July saw the largest air assault of the war so far. Over 700 drones in a single night were unleashed across Ukraine. These Iranian-supplied Shahed drones and others are used to swarm air defenses and honestly terrorize cities, often striking power grids. Ukraine has lost nearly half its pre-war power capacity and civilian targets. Ukraine has adapted by improving its air defenses and also using drones of its own. Ukrainian strike drones have hit targets deep in Russia, including a bold strike nicknamed Operation Spiderweb that damaged 41 Russian long-range bombers on the ground. This back-and-forth drone duel, from Kyiv to Moscow, really marks a new era of warfare. It's clear that relatively cheap drones are reshaping military strategy and raising the psychological and logistical stakes for both sides. International support and diplomacy, well, Western support for Ukraine remains strong. NATO countries, seeing Ukraine's fight as crucial for European security, have stepped up aid commitments. At a recent NATO summit, 32 nations agreed to boost defense spending, aiming for 5% of GDP by 2035, and collectively pledged 40 billion euros more in security assistance to Ukraine for this year. Perhaps even more striking, diplomatic signals suggest a push to shorten the war. The new U.S. administration under President Trump has taken a bold stance, reportedly pressing NATO to expedite heavy weapon transfers, and even setting a 50-day deadline for Putin to agree to a peace deal. In an unprecedented move, the US is coordinating large-scale arms purchases by allies like Patriot missiles and air defenses to get them quickly distributed to the battlefield. This ultimatum-style approach indicates a pivot, an attempt to force a negotiated endgame by dramatically increasing pressure on Russia. It's a high-stakes gambit. If no peace is reached within that window, it could herald an even fiercer phase of fighting. Diplomatically, Ukraine is also broadening its outreach, seeking support from the global south, for instance, engaging African nations that have been ambivalent. So far, Russia shows no sign of backing down, and Ukraine vows to fight until its territory is liberated, so global leaders are bracing for a critical crossroads in the coming weeks. Other global flashpoints, beyond Ukraine, geopolitical tensions remain elevated on multiple fronts. In East Asia, China's military posturing around Taiwan continues to cause international wariness. Daily incursions and aggressive drills keep the risk of a miscalculation in focus. Taiwan has been conducting large-scale defense exercises to demonstrate its readiness to resist any forced reunification attempts. US-China relations are tense not only due to Taiwan, but also trade disputes, as noted, tariffs are up, and tech competition, though high-level talks sporadically aim to stabilize the rivalry. In the Middle East, there have been flashes of conflict. Syria and Iraq see ongoing unrest, and concerns persist about Iran's nuclear advancements. Recent reports suggest Iran remains unwilling to curtail uranium enrichment, stoking fears that Israel or others could take preemptive action. Indeed, unconfirmed whispers about covert strikes and cyber attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities have circulated. Meanwhile, Israel's domestic situation has been volatile, with massive public protests over judicial reforms and debates about security preparedness. No major new war has erupted in the region, but the potential for sudden escalation, whether a clash involving Iran or a flare-up in places like the South China Sea, keeps analysts vigilant. For our purposes, the key geopolitical storyline is that the world remains in a delicate balance, and any of these brewing issues could rapidly become the next crisis that affects markets and global stability. Keeping informed is essential. In addition to hard news, it's valuable to pause and, glean some perspective. This week's Torah portion and the daily Daf Yomi Talmud study happen to offer some timely wisdom that really resonates with the current events. The weekly Parashat Pinchas tells of Pinchas's bold action to stop a plague afflicting his people, for which he's granted a covenant of peace. It's a paradox, an act of courage and even aggression, done with pure intentions, brings about greater peace. In today's context, this echoes the idea that sometimes decisive, courageous leadership is needed to resolve crises. Whether it's policymakers taking bold steps to curb an economic plague like inflation, or nations uniting to halt a literal plague of war, the message is that zeal directed toward a just cause can ultimately restore peace. The key, as Pinchas showed, is having the right intentions and values at heart. We should ask ourselves, when we push fiercely for change, in business, policy, or personal life, are we doing it out of anger or out of a sincere desire to heal and help? The right kind of zeal can be transformative. So, in Parashat Pinchas, the daughters of Zelophehad courageously step forward to claim their inheritance, making sure their father's legacy isn't lost. Their initiative was rewarded, and it actually set a precedent for fairness in inheritance laws. The subtle takeaway here is about investing in the future and ensuring fairness for the next generation. Just as those daughters secured a portion in the Promised Land, today we're grappling with securing our collective inheritance, whether that's a stable climate, a fair economy, or technological progress that benefits everyone. It's a reminder that we really have to speak up and act now so our children inherit a livable world and just systems. In practical terms, this might mean advocating for sustainable policies or equitable economic opportunities. Basically, anything that ensures we don't deprive future generations of their birthright. The Daf Yomi cycle is currently in Tractate Avodah Zarah, which deals with resisting idolatry and maintaining ethical boundaries amidst foreign influences. While very few of us bow to statues these days, we definitely face modern idols. Think about obsessions with wealth, tech hype, or power that can lead us astray. This Talmudic wisdom nudges us to reflect, what are we worshiping in our lives? Are markets and money our master, maybe at the expense of morals or community? Do we chase shiny new technologies without considering their ethical impact, making an idol of innovation itself? The The teachings of Avodah Zarah encourage us to engage with the wider world. We must, since we live in it, but to do so without sacrificing our core values. In a week filled with talk of economic shifts, AI breakthroughs, and global maneuvering, it's a grounding reminder not to lose sight of principles. We can embrace progress and pursue success, but not at the cost of what we hold sacred, whether that's family, integrity, or faith. Here's the bottom line. This comprehensive briefing covered the critical updates across markets, technology, climate, and geopolitics. The very things that can shape your financial well-being and daily life. The world is, honestly, complex and fast-changing, but by staying informed on these interconnected developments, you make sure you won't be caught off guard by events that matter. More importantly, weaving in timeless insights from the Parsha and Daf Yomi shows that even amid rapid change, some principles really do remain constant. It's this blend of timely information and timeless wisdom that empowers us to not just react to the news, but to understand and navigate it with purpose. Stay tuned and stay informed, because missing out on crucial updates is just not an option in times like these. By being here, you're making sure you won't miss the key trends and insights that everyone will be talking about. And as always, I encourage you to reflect on how these big trends impact you personally, and what role you might play in shaping what comes next. With that, thank you for listening, and until next time.